The cold air inside the cave pressed against his skin like damp velvet as the flashlight flickered for the last time. William Copley was bleeding alone in the dark while the guide walked away in silence. By the time help arrived, the silence had turned into something permanent. This case is about a young man named William Copley, who had always felt most alive where the world went quiet. Born and raised in the wooded suburbs of Illinois, William found comfort in nature's stillness. He wasn't an adrenaline junkie or a thrill seeker by reputation, but he was curious and drawn to places that most people never thought to enter. The smell of damp leaves in the forest, the gentle pulse of river currents against his boots, and the sound of wind moving through tree canopies shaped his early years. By his 20s, he had become known among friends for his deep fascination with the wild and unexplored. His weekends were spent far from the comfort of concrete, often navigating creek beds and forgotten trails with a quiet intensity that made even silence feel full. One of his closest friends was James, a fellow explorer with a bit more edge and a taste for risk. It was James who brought up the idea of a wild cave tour in Kentucky, not a tourist attraction with lights and paved paths, but a real, untouched cave system with no guarantees. They called it Bernard Lust Cave, hidden near Cave City, thick with underground chambers that remained in their natural state. It was May of 1993 when the group arrived, backpacks slung over their shoulders and confidence higher than it should have been. Another friend, Kevin, came along, but decided to stay above ground. He sensed something off and listened to that instinct. William didn't. He signed the waiver, zipped up his jacket, and stepped into the dark. The descent was slow at first. The limestone walls were cold and wet to the touch. The air smelled of soil and mineral dust. Their boots slid across slick rock, and the sound of dripping water echoed through every narrow passage. It was a world stripped of sunlight and time. There were no helmets. The guide walked them through the first sections, then stepped away, giving them space to explore alone. That was the moment everything began to shift. Without warning or ceremony, the cave became less like an adventure and more like a trap, and William, exhausted and disoriented, began to struggle just as the guide disappeared into the dark. The deeper they moved into the cave, the more the air began to change. What had felt damp and cool near the entrance now clung to their skin like wet cloth. The walls narrowed with each turn, and the slick rock underfoot grew more unstable. Their voices echoed, but the sound felt strangely delayed, as if the cave itself was swallowing their presence. William stayed near the front of the group. He was quiet, but alert. The light from his flashlight cast warped shadows that stretched and disappeared against the curved limestone. They had passed 2 ladders built into vertical shafts. The first was slick with condensation and barely wide enough for a single person to ascend. The second was even tighter. These were the last markers of the official tour. Beyond them was the unregulated portion where the guide allowed them to explore on their own. No lines, no safety briefings, just raw stone and silence. The group hesitated at first, but the adrenaline carried them forward. They were young and still thought the worst thing that could happen was a twisted ankle or a scraped knee. The guide stepped away for a moment. He told them he would return soon. No one questioned him. No one asked what they should do if something went wrong. The only light remaining came from their flashlights and a few headlamps. Some of them had clipped to their jackets. But William's gear was limited. He didn't have a helmet and had not brought spare batteries. His flashlight had already begun to dim. They continued down a narrow passage where the ceiling dropped low and the air grew colder. At some point, the group became split. William had lingered behind to catch his breath. His breathing had become shallow and uneven. The steep climb had pushed his legs to their limit. When he finally reached the base of the ladder leading back toward the upper chamber, he paused. The rungs looked further apart than before. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for the first one. His flashlight flickered again. Then darkness. No one saw the exact moment it happened. They only heard it. A sharp metallic clatter followed by the muffled thud of a body landing on rock. At first, the sound didn't register. It seemed impossible. But when they turned and called his name, the silence answered back. James was the first to find him. William was crumpled at the base of the ladder, motionless and bleeding from his head. His breathing was faint, and his skin had already begun to lose color. James ran. He retraced the path in panic, calling out for the guide. Minutes passed before he found him. When he explained what had happened, the guide did not rush. He walked, calm, detached. By the time they returned to William, his condition had worsened. The cave was now working against them. The deeper sections were colder and more humid. The stone radiated a chill that crept through clothes and into the body. It was the kind of cold that drains heat slowly until the body forgets how to fight. No medical equipment was brought down. No warming blankets, no splints or stretchers. The guide radioed for help, but gave vague information about the location. He seemed uncertain about how to direct the rescue team through the winding paths and narrow crevices. Above ground, the sun was setting. Below the surface, time had already stopped. The rescue team took hours to reach William. When they did, they found him barely conscious and suffering from advanced hypothermia. His pulse was weak. His body had gone into shock. The narrow cave walls made it nearly impossible to move him without triggering rock falls. Every minute spent navigating around sharp edges and unstable stone meant another degree of body heat lost. They tried. They worked in near silence, speaking only in short commands. The air was so still, it felt unnatural. They reached for his hands, but his fingers were already cold and unresponsive. They wrapped him in blankets, but it was too late. The cave had taken too much from him too quickly. William never made it out alive. By the time they carried his body back to the surface, the sky was black. His friends stood by the cave entrance, unable to speak. The trail they had followed into the earth had turned into a grave. The adrenaline had faded, and only silence remained. Not the kind that comes with peace, the kind that follows after a life disappears into the dark without a sound. William's body had stopped shivering. That was the moment the rescuers knew they were running out of time. In the stillness of the cave, where breath fogged and fell without echo, his silence was more terrifying than any scream. The fall had cracked his skull. Blood had soaked into the limestone floor beneath him, leaving a dark stain that would never fully dry. His headlamp had gone out long ago, leaving only the pale wash of rescue lights flickering across the jagged walls. He lay twisted near the base of a stone drop, barely conscious, lips drained of color, eyes half open but unfocused. His pulse when they found it was slow and slipping. The rescuers moved carefully. The chamber was narrow and uneven, barely wider than the length of a person's arms. One false step could send more rock tumbling. The air was dense with mineral dust, and the cold was absolute. It seeped through gloves and thick jackets and into the bloodstream. The rescuers had to crawl through a bottlenecked crawl space to reach him, their elbows scraping stone, flashlights mounted low so the beam would not blind one another. One paramedic called out to William softly, but got no answer. They pressed a hand against his chest, faint movement, but no reaction. James sat nearby in shock, back against the wall, covered in grime, eyes fixed on the floor. He had not spoken since returning with the guide. His hands were shaking, but his mouth stayed shut. The guide, who had promised to keep them safe, stood behind the others, saying nothing. He did not approach the body. He offered no instruction. His face was blank, as if distance could wash his hands clean. They attempted to lift William, but the rock face around him was unforgiving. The angle was too sharp, the space too tight. Every movement risked sending loose stones crashing down. They brought blankets and wrapped him in layers of foil and fleece, but his body refused to warm. His limbs were stiff. His eyes would flutter, then close again. Every breath sounded like it came from a deeper place, as if life itself had retreated inward. One rescuer tried to speak to him, told him to hold on, told him help was here, but William was already beyond words. The fall had done its damage, but it was the cold that was finishing what gravity had started. The human body is not meant to withstand prolonged exposure to subterranean temperatures without proper gear. The cave was winning. Time was dissolving. Up above, hours had passed. Below ground, it felt endless. The team considered lifting him out by hand, but the path they had come through was too tight to maneuver a stretcher. They had to widen it. Someone fetched tools. Metal against stone rang out like distant thunder. Every strike felt like a race against nature itself. But the cave does not rush. It does not yield quickly, and William did not wait. Somewhere between one breath and the next, his chest stopped rising. There was no cry, no gasp, just stillness. One of the medics lowered their head to listen. then gently placed a hand over his face. The silence that followed was not just quiet, it was absolute. It wrapped around the group and settled into the walls. James turned away. His shoulders collapsed inward. One rescuer cursed under their breath and punched the rock beside them. The guide said nothing. They wrapped William's body carefully and began the slow process of extraction. It took hours to carry him through the same path he had entered, with laughter and anticipation. Now every step was cautious, every movement burdened. When they emerged above ground, it was well into the night. The sky was black. The cave mouth gaped open behind them like something that had consumed more than a life. It had taken trust, innocence, and the illusion of safety. Word spread quickly. Authorities arrived. Photos were taken. Reports were written. The story would soon be public, but in that moment, under the weight of what had just happened, no one was thinking about courtrooms or headlines. They were thinking about the cold, the long delay, the waiver that had been signed, the guide who never came back fast enough, the ladder that should have been secured, the decision to explore something they did not fully understand. In the end, the cave remained untouched, silent, indifferent. It gave no answers, only questions, and the memory of a young man who entered chasing wonder and never found the way back out. After William's body was pulled from the cave, the forest around Cave City went quiet again. The trees stood still, and the mouth of the earth where he disappeared remained open without a sign or a warning. The entrance was never sealed. The rocks inside still carry the faint stains of what happened below. No marker, no sound, just cold stone and memories that will never speak. The lawsuit came quietly. His family stood in court as the guide's responsibility was debated in calm voices and legal terms. Liability was assigned, compensation was granted, but none of it reached the place where William died. The cave never changed. It still breathes in the same air. It still holds its silence, and tourists still pass through the region unaware of what it kept. James never gave a public statement. Kevin never spoke to reporters. There is no surviving footage, no audio recordings, only the fragments in the official report and the few people who were there. People who remember how long it took, how cold the cave felt, how slowly time moved after the fall. The cave was never closed to the public. It was never condemned. Its paths remain. The ladder still stands. Sometimes when the wind shifts, the trees near the entrance sway without sound, as if something down below still waits to be seen, still waits to be understood, and never will be. The guide never explained why he left them alone. His report gave no clear timeline, no urgency, no reason. The waiver William signed was buried in legal language, but it did not say how long help would take. The ladder was never replaced. The section of the cave where he fell was never closed. No warning signs were installed. And to this day, the exact number of minutes between his fall and the first rescue call remains unclear. Beneath the earth, the chamber where he died is still open, still silent, still waiting.